Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's 15 Minutes to BIM. Those of you who are joining us today, I'd like to give you a big welcome back. And those who are new, thanks for joining me for today's 15 Minutes to BIM webinar. My name is Karen Pierce, and I'm a Senior BIM Specialist at Unify Labs. Those of you who may be unfamiliar with Unify, we're a content management cloud solution and considered the gold standard amongst many of you as you work within Revit. This is a monthly series where we keep it to 15 minutes or less to talk about a topic within the BIM space. These topics include model health, library management, understanding metadata behind your content, and more. If you have a suggestion for future discussions, please feel free to drop us a message. Throughout the last 10 years I've worked in BIM. I've been a designer, I've been a BIM manager, and at Unify, I ensure you make the most out of our suite of products. While each firm is unique, many firms struggle with optimizing the use and organization of their BIM content. And those of you who may know me, I love questions, so I invite them all throughout the presentation. Also joining me as a panelist is Scott Scheipel, our Senior Manager of Customer Success. And Scott will be assisting me fielding all questions throughout the webinar. Please use the Q&A tool to ask them throughout the presentation, and we'll cover them all at the end. So today's webinar is all about optimizing your current content library. We're going to go back to basics, and we'll cover many different approaches throughout today's discussion. All right, so here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about just how to get started with such an expansive process. We're going to determine the changes that will occur and how best to approach those. We'll consider trimming the templates, storing content in container files, and as always, we'll keep it simple. All right, so getting started. To get started, you'll really need to understand your current content workflows. Setting up your Revit library requires a bit of understanding, of course, as how your company operates and its normal project workflows. The responsibility of setting up your company's Revit library should be led by someone who's been with the company long enough to have a good handle on it. The Revit library should also include processes that are relevant to modern practice, and of course the resources you'll need to incorporate to fit that process. And certainly don't ever try to force an operation that'll inhibit adoption. Make sure you consider how the library will be accessed over the course of a typical project, and if you'll need to modify it. You want your library organized in a fashion where it's going to be intuitive and simple for your users to find and access all the necessary resources. Your Revit library could be stored on a central network drive like you see here, but they should never be set on a single station or you'll risk losing all of those library resources. And as you continue to refine your library, there'll be many revisions and updates to your library along the way. It'll be super important to determine who on the team can modify the library structure and how updates and additions will take place. Allowing a limited number of users as well to update the library will minimize moving parts and maintain simplicity and keep a consistent brand. And if you're a Unify customer, library permission controls are super easy to manage, and there's an automated approval process to prevent any junk content or otherwise unapproved content from being accessible. All right, so the next topic was how to actually determine how things will change. Once you've identified the most common complaints and have understanding surrounding the current workflows, you'll see the changes that will need to take effect. But how will your team be notified as well of what's changing? And always remember to set those SMART goals. Enlist as many champions as possible and have them buy into that vision of change. Once those goals are established, the next step for implementing change in the workplace is to identify the potential obstacles that could fuel resistance and maybe derail the project. And the best way to avoid that resistance to change, seek to uncover the potential resistance prior to implementing the change. With a good workflow, you'll also notice how different teams can adjust to implementing workplace challenges at different rates. And here's a few examples of maybe what the outcome goals might be. Let's say everyone adheres to source content from a single location as much as possible. But if content is needing to be sourced from a different location, there absolutely has to be a protocol in place that'll add that missing content to the appropriate libraries. And those champions I mentioned, task them with communicating the workflow needs of those teams and bring into the table any issues they could foresee. Having that information helps the project team work out realistic plans and minimize resistance and proactively prevent problems. And always understanding not just what needs to change, but why. Why will always be the key to not only maximizing ROI, but realizing it too. All right, so I've been a longtime advocate of the CBT method for Revit templates. And huge shout out to Art Smarter for this. I would not be in my career if not for them. The CBT method refers to chassis, body, and trim. And the chassis is going to be the base frame of a motor vehicle here. Chassis can also be kind of referred to as maybe the company or the satellite or the office location of your organization. It could also maybe be particular towards studios, maybe only hospitality or sports or healthcare. So the chassis is really going to include all the essential elements and nothing more. Those are the things that won't change necessarily from project to project. Your chassis should include text and dimension styles, symbols and line weights. Fill patterns and filled region types can also be included. Next, of course, is the body. The body module will build off of the chassis module, like how different car bodies will use the same chassis. This can refer to components like, hey, the hospitality I mentioned, well, that can be hotels, convention centers. Those are different body types. Sports facilities, you know, we have stadiums as well as the practice facilities. Those are also different body types. So this template adds project type elements to your office standard content. This includes items like sheet and view setups. It can also include title blocks, schedules, and standard system families specific to that project type. Identifying any required shared parameters for the project type usually occur on this level as well. So now we've picked out the model car we want, but what style wheels do we want, or seats, or cloth, or leather? Trust me, you got kids, you know you want leather. So, you know, those are items to really keep in mind. And speaking up to those particular components, you know, I'm also an advocate of keeping Revit files as lean as possible. Revit files, we know, get big on their own. So you don't need to add any extra elements in there. So rather than loading up your templates with families you may or may not use, I always recommend actually loading them as you need them. So does this mean I need different separate templates for each body? Definitely not. I would keep it as honestly probably even company specific. Definitely split out your imperial and metric, but you can really have your chassis just be your firm's Revit template. So for Unify customers, how does that really translate into what Unify can do managing your content? Well, the chassis is your library structure. You might split it up according to architecture, structural, construction sites, maybe basically by division of what type of content you're working on. From there, the body can be really how that content is categorized. We have ceilings, roofs, walls, all separated out. Even Dynamo scripts and PDFs can have their place within the body of your template. And then trim. Remember how we speak to metadata in all of our BIM discussions? Trim can be those tags that we talk about, so by division number, masterclass, keynotes even. So all of that can have content in relation to each other on a particular finish, just like with our car example. All right, the next topic we had to cover was container files. So if we're going into the area of having a very lean Revit template, having container projects in order to bulk load content might really come in handy. Container file, as you see in the description here, by its definition, is just a Revit file that contains specific system or component families. But unlike that template file, a container file is not used to create new model files. It's just meant to hold content. So within Unify, we're able to utilize the tool Harvest Project in order to not only have content loaded into Unify, but from here, we'll actually be able to import all different types of families, system families, drafting views, legends, and even fill patterns. Now, the transfer project standards also works in a similar way. The only concern with using container files is that whenever this content is not actually going to be utilized within the Unify environment, it's not going to be allowing for automatic upgrades or easy version control. You might have to really manually keep track of that. Great examples of container projects can be geared towards divisions. It can also be geared towards studios like we discussed, healthcare or sports, but it can also contain all your stair families, railings, doors, walls. all the different types of components that really make up your organization's content. Now, when in doubt, we all know what KISS stands for. Keep it simple, superhero. So always know that usually sometimes the simplest solution is best. By understanding your company's current struggles, you'll be able to set those appropriate goals that we discussed. As you meet or struggle to meet those goals, adjust your game plan. Keep your templates trimmed by remembering that CBT method we discussed, and use Unify to enhance your library structure and take advantage of features like version control, automatic upgrades, save searches, and more. And just as if you'd like any additional tips and tricks, check out our Knowledge Center where we have this webinar on demand, and we can discuss other library management techniques such as the Sandbox library, or if you'd like to discuss any additional best practices or any unique issues your company may be facing. You can schedule a custom demonstration simply by reaching out to us at unifylabs.contact or sales@unifylabs.com. All right, all. So with that, I will be turning it over to Scott Scheipel to assist with our Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. So we have two questions. Number one, Karen, in your eyes, is there a sweet spot on the optimal number of libraries, or does it truly differ from firm to firm?
Libraries are permissions-based. So again, that whole KISS method, if you're a global organization, you'll likely want to separate out your libraries between metric and imperial content. You'll also maybe need to set it up by country, even for that matter. But if you're more on the local side, usually the simpler the libraries are, the best. Always remember you can use metadata, tagging conventions, star ratings, favorites to really tailor the content search results to the method that best suits you.
Awesome. And number two, in not having the ability to create subfolders and wanting to start from scratch, do you recommend we start with our tagging, our naming conventions, or our library structure first?
Naming conventions should always be first. People are always going to want to be able to tell very quickly what content that they're looking at. If your naming convention doesn't mention that it's an electrical equipment, then likely they'll be pulling the wrong piece of content. So start with that first, and then you can actually go into tagging to try to connect related pieces of content together. And then libraries can always be actually, believe it or not, discussed last because that's all permissions-based. So we can go from that sandbox environment to a more broadly restricted structure.
Perfect. Cool. So thanks everyone for joining. As Karen mentioned, we'll talk to everyone again during our next session, which will be on June 10th at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern, which will continue with the topic on the best practice of basic things, which will surround Tag You're It, how effective is your tagging strategy. Everyone have a great rest of the day, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.